Hey team, so this is now going through exercise 12C. Again, this is to do with interpreting transition matrices. So in our previous exercise, we were looking at how to convert this diagram into a transition matrix. And now what we're going to be doing is how do we interpret it? Okay, so remember this is the proportion and percentages. And so we're going to learn to apply these proportions and percentages in questions, okay? And what likely they'll tell you is something like how many cars were to begin at Bendigo, for example, and then what is the proportion, which is 80% of that is being returned to Bendigo, how many cars will actually be returned. So if you had, 500 cars, if 80% is returned, then how many cars are there? That's what we're going to be doing here. So relatively straightforward, very similar to what you were doing before. But it starts off by getting the transition matrix first, and then from there we'll answer the questions. So let's have a look over here. This is our previous example where we set up our transition matrix based on the Albury, Benalla, and Wodonga diagram. So we went from the diagram, we got our transition matrix. Once we got the transition matrix, let's answer the questions here. So part A, use the transition matrix T, okay, and its transition diagram to answer the following questions. So A, I'm going to write maybe over here, A, I, Albury. So in Albury, what percentage of cars rented in Wodonga each week are predicted to be returned to Albury? Well, looking at the diagram, if you had rented from Wodonga, so starting off with Wodonga, remember up here is the rented and then returned is on the side. Okay, so Wodonga and returned to Albury, well, that's 5% there, okay, because they're asking for percent. So I would say 0.05, I'm going to 0.05. And again, how do you change it to percentage? Times it by 100. Okay, so do that on your CAS and you should get 5%. Don't forget to put the percent symbol. And then moving on to double I, we can see that Benalla, so Benalla, what is the percentage? Well, in this case, renting from Wodonga but returning to Benalla is 0.15. So here I'd say, all right, 0.15, again, to change it to percentage, times it by 100, and that gives me 15%. Okay, and then finally, in the last one, triple I. So triple I here, 1, 2, 3, returning it back to Wodonga. So you rented from Wodonga and then you return it back, and clearly in the diagram we can see, or we can see in the transition matrix, Wodonga returning back to Wodonga is 80%, okay, or you can see from Wodonga returning back is 80%. So here 80% times, or 0.8, sorry, times 100 makes it 80%. Okay, so question AI was relatively straightforward there. Maybe I'll just move this across too, actually. I'll just put it over here. So it looks neat. All right. Ooh, that's not so neat. Maybe if I press enter. There we go. And then we'll do part B now. So 200 cars. So here, notice they tell you the number of cars that were rented in Albury this time. So we now know there are 200 cars. So for part B, we now know there are 200 cars in Albury, right? So the first part says, how many of these cars do we expect to be returned to Albury? Okay, so in part I, in Albury, if there are 200 cars to begin with and they rented it from Albury, what's the percentage of returning it back to Albury? So we have a look at our transition diagram. We say, well, rented in Albury is here, but chance of returning it back to A is 0.7. Okay, so that means there's 70% chance, okay, there's 70% chance of the cars returned back to Albury. But then how many cars are there? There are 200. So essentially you're looking for 70% of 200. So how do you do that on your CAS? That's just 70% means 70 over 100. Of means times 200. So that's what I'm going to be typing on my CAS. So here we go. We're going to do 70%. So 70 control divide over 100, or just divide and then times by 200. And you see 140 of those cars. I'm just going to screenshot this and then put it in. We go. And we can see now that that would mean you can expect, therefore, expect 140 cars returned. Okay, so this is what the second part of the exercise is about. It's about you trying to interpret the information. Okay, so I'm just going to make this a bit smaller just so it looks a bit neater. Let me just press enter a bit down there. Hopefully I haven't ruined anything. Nope. All right, so then if you were to do part double I and then triple I, it's going to follow the same format. The only difference here is that, as you can see, will be, sorry, I'm just trying to, I just like it looking a bit neater, that's all. There we go. All right, so we're now up to part double I, so returning back to Benalla. So now, if it was borrowed from or rented in Albury, how many of those cars will we return to Benalla? Well, again, same thing. Look at the transition matrix. So from Albury and then return to Benalla is 20%. So essentially here is very similar to what we were doing before. We're trying to find now 20% of 200, and you can do the same thing over here. Change this to 20. And then we know the other one was 10%, so you might as well do it now as well. So 10%. So 40 cars back to Benalla. Okay, so I'm going to screenshot that. Here we go. This is for Benalla. Ooh, here we go. So that's for Benalla. We know that there are 40 cars. So here, that's right. Therefore, expect 40 cars returned. And then similarly in triple I, it was back to Wodonga, wasn't it? Which we figured it was 10%. If you're wondering how I knew 10% is because 70 plus 20 plus 10 has to add up to all the possible options. So it's 100%. That's why I knew it was 10%. Okay, and then here we're going to screenshot this one just to remind ourselves. Here we go. So we expect 20 cars. Therefore expect 20 cars returned. Okay, there you go. So that was part B. And then let's look at part C now. It says, what percentage of cars rented in Benalla each week are not expected to be returned to Benalla? So this is a key one, just to get you thinking, not expected. Okay, so first we need to know, well, how much is expected? What's the percentage of expectation that if you rent it in Benalla and then you're going to return it back to Benalla? So let's have a look at our transition matrix again. If you rented in Benalla, the chances you returning or expected to return is 0.77. But since we're looking for not, okay, so not returned or not expected, well then it's the other part, isn't it? Now remember, 0.77 is a proportion of 1. So to find the leftover, we need to find the remaining. Now you can work out from 77 how much more you need to get to 100, or if you were to calculate this, you could do, in part C, you can do 1 minus 0.77, and that should give you, what, 23, so 0.23 as a proportion, and that's how much is proportion, not expected. Okay, and so when they ask you what percentage, well, 0.23 convert to percentage times by 100, and that gives you 23% not expected. Okay, and that's what we're doing. We're working with a transition matrix. As you can see in this exercise, it's more about using the transition matrix to answer the question and getting more out of it. So here, D, 160 cars. Okay, so 160 cars were rented in Albury. So 160 rented in Albury. And what are we looking at? How many of these cars are expected to be returned to either, now keyword there is either, Benalla or Wodonga. So it means that you need to know how many cars would be returned to Benalla, and then how many cars will be returned to Wodonga, and then you add them two together because it says either. So it could be, let's say, 40 cars in Benalla, and then 100 cars at Wodonga, then how many are to be expected? I expect that in total is 40 plus 100, which is 140. Okay, I just made up the number, by the way. So we first need to find out how many were returned, expected to be returned to Benalla. Okay, so Benalla and then Wodonga is what we need to know. So rented from Albury, returned to, actually, did we answer that question? Oh, we did. Oh, well, that's pretty easy. So we already know we didn't because it's 160 cars now. Okay, no. So rented from Albury, returned to Wodonga is 20%, and returned to Benalla is 20%, and then returned to Wodonga is 10%. All right, so we've got 10 and 20%. So essentially, you can just you don't have to work them out individually. You know there are 20% returned and then 10% returned. Well, together it would be 30% returned. Okay, so you might as well just find 30% of 160, which we can do on our CAS here. Or you can do it individually. So if I did it individually, it would have been 10% of 160, so times 160, plus 20% of 160, or you could have done straight up 30% of 160, and you still get 48. Okay, so either way, it doesn't matter which way, you will get the same answer. Okay, so we can expect how many cars is what they asked. How many of these cars we can expect? 48 of these cars will be returned. Okay, so you can see there, I'm just going to zoom in a bit and then maybe move this a bit smaller. There you go. Then you can expect, therefore, 48 cars. Okay, that's how you would do this particular problem over here. I'm just going to press enter just to give it a bit more space. Maybe I'll move that one there. All right, so this is 12, the second part after interpretation. And you can see that this exercise, there's quite a bit more to go there. But essentially, that's what you're doing. You're going to interpret from the transition matrix or develop the transition matrix. And that should give you plenty to sort of practice your skills there. So this is all a setup for 12C part 3. So you need to kind of get your head around how to set up a transition matrix, how to interpret this transition matrix, and then finally we're going to apply it with recurrence. Okay.